Okay, let me play the disclaimer. And Alex, you can begin in about a minute or so, minute and 30 seconds.
Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote a general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Alex, if you're ready. Okay, we see your screen.
Thank you so much. Good day, everybody. This is the North American Corona team. And this is part of the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute in conjunction with KFTV Canada. It is also in conjunction with the Kesh Foundation American channel and the Mexican channel, because this is the North American team. And what we are doing is presenting the material as presented by Marin Tevakoli Kesh, who is the father of modern plasma science. And we welcome not only the North American group, but this has turned into an international meeting because we're broadcasting on all 6 continents. And I want to welcome everybody in all time zones. And thank you so much for being here, making this a very special event. Today is a continuation of the basic understanding of plasma science. And about 3 weeks ago, we changed the pattern of the teaching with respect to the Knowledge Seekers workshops. And this has caused a change in the teaching the way I've seen it. And today we're going to be discussing about the brain. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is May the 16th, 2021. This is part of the Kesh Foundation Canada Plasma Education Series. We started basic teachings with the Brazilian group in October, carried on with intermediate teachings in January, advanced teachings in February, but all of these are still basic teachings. And what we've tried to do now is to continue on in basic understanding. And we say basic because we are getting new people all the time, and it's becoming very difficult for people to follow. And so we are trying to bridge between where we were historically and where we are racing to, and we are definitely racing ahead. The technology is moving ahead, and this is very, very important. We have discussed basic dimensions, X, Y, and Z axis. We've seen how the amino acid affected the Krebs cycle, the DNA, and the codons. And we are now going into additions, where we're looking at the future to see what is going to happen until June the 18th, where things will radically change. And so we try to be in a bit of a preparation mode. this preamble is very important because these teachings are for new knowledge seekers. They are also for experienced knowledge seekers. We don't have enough teachers. It is numerically impossible to serve. We don't have enough content for our TV stations. So we need to produce more. And we don't have enough experience in discussing the unique terminology that is associated with the plasma science, except in vehicles such as this. So what I try and do is use that terminology as we're discussing the various books that Mr. Cash has. And of course, the most important one is book number 1, which is the Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And for a lot of knowledge seekers, why are they concerned about the universal order of creation when they just want the cups of life? And ironically enough, there are not enough knowledge seekers who want the universal cups of life, because at this point in time, they're talking about a 4th wave. So, and you know, if there were 3, and if there's a 4th coming, then there will be more in the future. So what we really need to know is how the universe is created, because we are part of the whole process. And so fundamentally and very simplistically, we have to say that the universe exists from energy. And energy is a charge. It's a charge because it's in motion, and energy is always in motion. So in a singular fashion, we can look at the cover of book number 1, and we can see the combination of the 3 matter states. And when we say the 3 matter states, these are non-visible to the naked eye, what we call capital M matter, dark matter, and antimatter. But all things are working in combination. So you see 2 plasma states connected with an infinity loop in this diagram. So there's a coming and there's a going. And so in our terminology, we understand that this coming and going is a magnetical charge or a gravitational charge. And fundamentally, everyone has to understand that this is natural plasma. And we have been introduced to natural plasma through new technologies. We started with nanostate, and then we got into GaN state, and we started to realize that we could actually capture energy and not only increase this energy, but increase it by orders of magnitude, which is 10 times greater. And how many orders of magnitude? Well, we haven't decided on that. We're just knowing that there's more. And in order to understand how this energy is flowing, we had to introduce surface to volume ratios. And this allowed us to go through various geometries, which we call dimensions. And how we go through these dimensions is determined by susceptibility. And the first order of susceptibility is to go from what we call the atomic state in the physicality to the monatomic state in the nanostate. And this set up a gradient where we had the dynamism coming from the dynamic flow of the plasma. And depending on the gradient, we can adjust how dynamic this plasma really is. And this is, in essence, what we call dynamic positioning. So we introduced more terminology, and so we have principal matter, which is the original creation of the matter. And as far as we're concerned, our original creation comes from the amino acids, and we've seen the link with the DNA and the RNA. Of course, from the amino acids, it introduced the star formations. Today, these star formations have a relevant part in our discussion about the brain today, and we shall see that. Fundamentally, these fields, in order to retain this energy, what we call a plasma state, involves a rotating field. And once you have one field, and then you have another field, there has to be an interaction of these fields. And this interaction is non-tangible, and that's the key point. It is this non-tangible interaction of plasma states that creates a dynamic plasma state. And so what happens to the rest of it? What happens to the matter state? What happens to us? What are we? Well, we are the artifacts of the manifestation of this energy in motion, you see. And when you look at these artifacts, really and truly, it's nothing more than residue. We are the residue. And how we came here is through another pattern of energy transmutation is called conversion. And so we're going to open up that can of worms as well. But fundamentally, when we see the basic terminology, when we see what is a PM tick, what is array, PM tick and array being synonyms, these are energy parceling units called energy packs, and this is where energy is moving through the universe, through outer space, through the vacuum. What we see is the nothingness, is the fullness of the energy in motion from the universe to ourselves here. And this energy goes through patterns, dimensions, sequences. And when we are out of sequence, then we're out of sorts. And so sequence providing is fundamental to the way energy moves. And so one of the things we learned about surface to volume ratios and how it was affected through what we call the piezoelectric effect, or just a simple changing of the tension changes the charge. But the most important thing is how the plasma energy is moving with these changes in the charge, with these sequences, and the change in the understanding, the perception, it's feeding. The plasma is feeding. And we have other subjects in the future to discuss. But fundamentally on this planet, something that we can all relate to is the universal solvent, which we call water. And it is made of basically hydrogen and two hydrogen and an oxygen. And what makes it a universal solvent is that one of these hydrogens gets sheared off and it leaves a hydroxyl. And this hydrogen that gets sheared off is an energy pack. And in this particular drawing, we don't know where it's going. And what's left behind the hydroxyl, we know that that wants to go somewhere. And this is what makes the life possible on this planet, is the ability of water to interact with so many different things. It is nature's solvent. And so the difference, of course, is that the water molecule has left one hydrogen and one oxygen. But the key point with the oxygen is that it actually has a neutron. And so this neutron is actually the gravitational core component, which consists of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter, and is fundamental to the manifestation of elements. And so we discussed a while back the atomic math. And so we know that the neutron, as we say, is the core component, is atomic nucleus, and it consists of electron and a proton. But the electron and the protons have a mass, and the electrons and the protons are representative of that hydrogen. And so the hydrogen does not have a neutron. When you introduce the neutron mass identifies the material that we see on the periodic table of elements. But we have a problem with the atomic math, as we know, is that the mass of the electron plus the mass of the proton does not equal the mass of the neutron. And so this is where the plasma science takes over. And then we have, as we're breaking down the various barriers, and this is one of the things that we're going to do today, is we're going to break down a barrier of understanding. Another barrier was the second law of thermodynamics, because it too doesn't add up. As you understand, in conventional science, we have the conservation of energy. Well, you can't conserve energy if you don't know where that energy is going, and there is a fallacy in our understanding of that energy. So we find that this gap in energy levels with respect to our atomic math falls squarely in the PM ticks, the principal matter, which consists of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And so what we're looking at here is the relationship of the PM ticks and the energy in respect to their matters. But the thing is that this is inside the PM tick. So the PM tick itself is an aggregate of 3 levels of energy, which the combination of which gives it the substructure necessary for it to be a charge in motion. And then this charge in motion has a place where it wants to go. And so we have a capability of working with these charges in motion. We just don't have a capability of understanding it very well. And a lot has to do with some of our misguided concepts and some of our, shall we say, educational systems. So primarily what entropy is the loss of heat. And that comes through natural decay system. So we all know that as things decay, that they heat up. And so the second law of thermodynamics has to do with this loss of heat. But you all know that when you go out into the cold, you stay warm. So you are constantly internally generating heat. So we are actually heat generators, which is opposite to entropy. So it's called counter-entropic. And this is the essence of life. So life itself is counter-entropic. And since we are part of life, you could say that we are in many ways protesters of the matter state science. But we don't protest enough because we have a pandemic that has put us into a situation where our educational system is coming back to haunt us. And so what I have is the P4P system, which is the four Ps, the pharmacology and the psychiatry, which are two sciences overruling the psychology and physiology of man. And so there's an interaction of these things. So we treat the psychology with physical things like pharmacology, and the physiology, which is physical, we treat it with psychiatric things, which are non-physical. There's a lot of confusion here. And so we'd like to introduce the new physiology to eliminate this cross that we bear, but we're going to have to do a re-education. And if it's difficult to read what is on the screen, the reason it is difficult is because the double cross is very deceptive. And this is the problem. It is very easy for man to go down the wrong path when not only we have misinterpretation of our education, but then we have a double speak. And so what it does, it sets us in for a pattern where we're kind of scatterbrained. In other words, we cannot be coherent. We find that in terms of education, we have a very short attention span. And this has happened over the last several decades. And the shock of it all, and I say shock, is when you find out the truth. This is what happens. You kind of do get a shock, is that this was well planned. And so when we look at the basic science and the understanding of the basic science in the old science, we try and create different schools of thought. And one of these schools of thought has to do with the trophic sequencing, which follows the law of the fittest. And trophic involves eating. So we find that the survival of the fittest involves where the strongest dominates the weakest. And so the largest animal on this planet is a whale. And we find that the whale is actually doesn't eat other fish, it eats other plankton, which plankton is very, very tiny and almost microscopic. And the largest land animal, the elephant, likes to eat hay. And in Canada here, we have moose. And let me tell you, this animal weighs a ton. And I'm not kidding, it weighs a ton. And it is a plant eater. And then, of course, man, we like to breed cows. Cows are vegetarians. And so we eat the cows. So man is a carnivore. But if a carnivore eats a vegetarian, does that mean that man is a surrogate vegetarian by eating a cow? A lot of confusion there. And then we find, we go down the food chain, so-called food chain, we have mice, and little tiny mice seem to terrorize big fat elephants. And then we have the tiny plankton in the water, which is the food for these massive whales. And then oddly enough, we have other creatures called amoeba, which are single-celled animals that catch food. And a single-celled animal, complete with the ability to move, chase, digest, think, all of this, all the same capabilities that everybody on this list has. And so when we look at all on this list, we are all a combination of cells. So for us, we have over 70 trillion cells in our body. And here is one single amoeba, a single cell. In other words, 1/70 trillionth of our size. And it has all the capabilities that we do. Maybe this trophic sequencing is something that we don't need to worry about, you see, because there are other factors, and this is another thing that we have to change. And so I bring up the subject of artistic elephants, and the reason for that, of course, is because the elephants were a beast of burden, especially in India and other places in the Far East. And of course, they're being replaced by modern equipment. And so what do you do with these guys? And, they're just dumb animals, aren't they? So, let's see what they can do with a paintbrush. And we wonder if, you give someone a paintbrush, what are they? Are they just a paint spreader? Or would you call them a paint applier? Would you call them a paint artist? And so that depends on criteria. And so one of those criteria, of course, is how big is large? How much is expensive? How much is enough? How much do you take into account? And more importantly, when do you stop? An artist knows. And so an elephant is an artist. And as the elephant keeper said, when the elephant stops painting, the artwork is complete. Is the elephant that smart? Yeah, you betcha. Because when he makes a painting and they sell the painting, the elephant has food to continue. So we look at the brain ratio that we have, and we like to compare our brain size to our body size, as if that's really important, because the brain is physical and the body is physical. And so we find that our ratio as a man is actually we have a very large brain compared to our body. And so although the elephant's brain is larger, when we look at the ratio, the elephant's is actually very small in terms of a ratio. But we just found that, the elephant is obviously smart enough to, shall we say, become artistic. And so there are other factors, and we don't take into account these factors. And so that's a discussion today, because we were looking at the brain size to soul size ratio. So we find that physically the brain is gigantic and the soul is incredibly tiny. And so is that really correct? And we get away with this kind of false thinking when we claim that our brain utilization is only 15%. Well, that means 85% is unused. And we all know that what happens if you don't use it, you lose it. And so therefore the brain would atrophy if that were true. And actually the brain does atrophy. And we've seen that in cases of Alzheimer's and brain damage. And when we look at the component of the brain, we find that a key component is calcium, which is very, very alkaline. And so we understand what kind of damage we're doing, not only to our brain, but the rest of the body in our highly acidic environment. And so we like to test ourselves physically, and we're quite proud of the way we test ourselves physically, because we're working with things within the physical range. things like X-rays and CRT scans, ultrasound and MRI scans. And then we, of course, when we look at the rest of the body, we have ECG machines, which check our heart condition. And then, of course, the last frontier is to map the brain. And we have this beautiful contraption, which is a helmet with many, many electrodes attached to it. I said electrodes, but it's a magnetoelectroencephalogram. And what it is trying to do is figure out the mapping of the brain. But this is, again, a physical mapping, like, where is Chicago or where is Barcelona? But, the thing is, doesn't matter what the map is in the brain. It's not what you have, it's how you use it. And too many are, at this point in time, are what we like to call, well, we don't like to call it, it's what they are. They're brain dead. They're somehow disconnected from something. And so this comes about from being serving to self. Now, we all know that's important, but when we prosper at the expense of others, then that really means that we're just working with schemes that are too small. And of course, we are such pompous creatures. So when our presence is here now, then we are in the position to tell the universe to shut up. Although the universe brought us here, the universe had the capability, but you know what? I'm here now, so now it's my turn. This is a real demonstration of what we call pinheads and pea brains. And so when we think about the brain and do the studies of it, we can look at the example of water babies, and we find that the pressure on the brain that comes causes a loss of brain function. And so this brain function has to move. So much for this mapping. But what does happen is that the brain function does eventually get restored, but you'll find that it's in a different location. So regardless of the size of the brain, the functionality that the human is looking for on this planet is restored in the brain at a different location. So this physical mapping is not really what is counting. What we're looking at in terms of the brain is we see that there is a left side and there is a right side. We call the left side the left hemisphere and the right side the right hemisphere. But there's a cross channeling. So in other words, the left side affects the right side of the body and the right side of the brain affects the left side of the body. And we see that there's also energy that is flowing back and forth. And this is something that is kind of difficult to understand. But now in the new plasma science, and please understand, this is an extension of basic understanding. So we're not going to get into the heavy duty, bless you. We're not going to get into the heavy duty medical training here. But what I do want to point out now is that we've identified within the brain the pituitary gland and the pineal gland, and of course the soul position. And so there is a reference here to a star formation. And it is from this star formation, we have to understand that I can give an idea and still maintain the wholeness of the brain. In other words, I don't get a hole in my head by giving an idea. If I give money, I have a hole in my pocket. That's understandable. That's physical. But plasmatically speaking, I can give an idea, and that idea is a plasmatic thing. And this is what plasmatic feeding is all about. So I can give this plasmatic feeding without being self-consuming. And so I become a catalyst in that transaction. And so we're looking at relationships. So in our own brain, in our own soul, we have an existence. But within our brain, we have a duality, a left hand and right side of the brain. But we introduce the the glands, and we have a star formation, and we have a trinity. And then that now has a basic dimension, but where and in what? So we have to have context. So if I give an idea, who am I giving this idea to? And can I be giving that idea on an exclusive basis? So in general, the answer is yes and no. And that is something to be discussed in future classes. But what we want to discuss more about is the surface to volume ratio and its ramifications here. Surface to volume ratios, as we've discussed in the past, have to do with the ratio of sizes. And so this is, again, very much that is physical. But what I want to draw attention to is the difference. So although when we have 4 sizes here, we find that as we progress from the left to the right, each picture is half of the other one. And so the ratio goes on the left one as a surface to volume ratio 1:1. The next one is 2:1. The next one is 4:1. The next one is 8:1. And so by having, or shall we say, cutting in half this surface to volume ratio, by cutting in half the area, we are doubling the ratio. And the difference in the ratio, in the gap, in the first one is only 1, and then it doubles to 2, and then it doubles to 4. But in terms of plasma science, this is multiplied by an order of magnitude. And so this changes the gradient. And the gradient feeding is going from the higher to the lower. So when we say, in this case, the higher being the larger is feeding the lower. But this is the physical aspect to it, you see. And before I go further, it isn't feeding one exclusively. It is feeding all of the lower. But plasmatically, if we look at the other way and we say, okay, we have energy going both ways. So the one with the highest ratio being the smallest one, kind of like the soul, is feeding the highest one. And then all of the other ones in between are also feeding. And so we find that although the one on the left has the highest physicality, the ones on the right have a higher energy and they're feeding it. And this is the plasma feeding, and this is how it goes. So our brain, which is smaller than our body, is what's doing the feeding to the rest of the body. And this is the discussion today. So we have other components in our body, and so we see that there we have a heart. And the heart has a relationship to the lungs and the thyroid gland. These components kind of create a star formation. Another system we have is the liver. Supporting components are the kidneys and the pancreas. Another gland forms a star formation relationship. Another system in our body, the Leydig cells, which have to do with our reproductive system. And so we have ovaries or testicles, and we have a prostate gland. The combination of all these, there's that star formation again. Well, then we have a nervous system. And so this nervous system is broken down into 2 types of systems. One we call the parasympathetic, which is what we call the system to allow you to rest and digest. It obviously involves the stomach and the intestines. And then we have a sympathetic system, which affects our adrenal glands and cortisone, which is what we call the flight or fight system. And these 2 systems work hand in hand together. And each of these systems has its own star formation. And then these 2 star formations work together in an autonomous nervous system. an autonomous nervous system, and what is the energy source and what is the energy conduction. And then, of course, in the last couple of weeks, we've been discussing the cells, how the cells have the capability of transmutating information inside the cells. There's nucleolus, the Golgi apparatus, there are ribosomes, and of course the mitochondria. And these all in certain combinations also produce star formations. So I hope you're noticing the pattern here. But there's another system which is really hard to understand, is the electron transport system. And now we understand way better because of the plasma science. This is the GANS highway within our body. And the electron transport system, which we cannot see, is transferring the plasma energy, which again, we cannot see. So all of this, what I've talked about, is what we look at as some kind of relationship to dimension building. And as we've seen, as the dimensions become more complex, they become more stable. So we went through about 6 levels, and we've seen that there is a possibility of having a connection and a relationship between the earth and the dynamic plasma that we're all involved with. And there's a progression as we go through these various dimensions, which involve obviously our environment, nano and GAN states, and then these are all physical. And then we get into the non-physical, which is the plasma and the dynamic plasma states. And so sometimes we look at these dimensions as chakra building, and we like to associate colors with the chakras, and we like to associate these chakras with our organs. The thing is, the chakras are non-physical, and the colors are within the visible spectrum, and the organs, of course, are in the physical spectrum as well. So this has to be segregated. And so let's leave that apart. Let's just look at the organs. And so we see what we discussed here is kind of an overall view of 7 different type of organs or organ systems, if you will, which is, similar to the 7 days of the week. You could say that, or to the 7 chakras. But, this is a connection that is really irrelevant for the purposes here, you see, because when we look at the brain and we understand that the brain is running the whole body, and we say that when someone is not in touch with reality, that they're kind of brain dead. But what happens when they go into a coma and they're still alive? So how is that possible? They're technically brain dead, then they can come back from a coma. And now we understand with the plasma science that we can actually bring someone out of a coma with the new plasma science. In other words, reconnecting the brain, the reconnecting to what? Reconnecting to something, and how? And, what does that mean? If the brain is not running the rest of the body, then we have a problem with our terminology. And so this is a break in the terminology. Let's understand, because we have systems within systems. We have PM ticks that are combined from matter, antimatter, and dark matter. We have matter that comes from matter, antimatter, and dark matter. So combinations become combinations, systems within systems. You know what? We have brains. We have a brain, and we have a heart brain. The heart must have a brain. It runs the heart and the star formation around it. The liver must have a brain. It runs the star formation, the reproductive system, the nervous system, the cellular system. Who opens the walls? Who allows the food to come in? Who creates the ATP? And how does that energy get transferred throughout the rest of the body through the electron transport system? It must have a brain as well. So each of these brains are subsystems of the total system. And so this now accounts for understanding where the intelligence comes from. And then when you think about it, we have 73 trillion cells, and each one of these cells has a brain. And we know that a cell can have a brain because an amoeba is a single cell organism, complete with the total package of being able to grow, move, chase food, digest, and obviously has enough brains to know that it needs to get energy and will do what it takes to do that. So there's another organ, and that has to do with the sensory organs. And these sensory organs are sensory to what? And that is the subject for the next class next week. The surface to volume ratio shows that all of these organs that I've outlined today, all of these systems that I've outlined today have bends in the process. And every bend creates a negative positive charge across the bend. And so when we look at the plasma energy and we see the basic 3 dimensions, the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. X is rotation, y is through the polarity, z is the field strength. And these are all fields that we cannot see with the visible eye. These are all fields that the doctor cannot see with the current equipment that we have. But hello, we're alive, and we have 2 hemispheres. We have 2 hemispheres in our brain. We have 2 hemispheres on this planet. And when the poles are the same, they repel. And so when we found out last week that when we flip the poles, we create an attraction. And this is why the left side of the brain works with the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain works with the left side of the body. You have to cross over. And so all this flipping is done constantly because energy has to move, and it moves from the positive to the negative. And then of course it has to flip over to go from the negative to the positive. And then of course, when it flips over, we see the constant moving of energy. So we have the creation of stuff, which has a neutron, and the hydrogen does not have the neutron. And so that is the energy in motion. And that, you know, where is the brains that runs this alpha linolenic acid? What is the brains that causes the gates to open in the phospholipids? Who trains it? You know, we're so impressed with the circus when the lion tamer comes with his whip and chair to tame the lion. Well, who tames these essential amino acids, these omega-3, 6, and 9s to open properly? Open sesame, let the nutrition come in. And so we are confused. We have different points of view, and we try and get this clarity. And we see that there's this basic structure, our soul, our emotions, and our physicality. And it is our structure on the planet, which also has a soul, emotion, and a physicality. And all are repositioning because the plasma substructure is offering the magnetical gravitational relationship, which is causing this positioning. So we on this planet have a relationship between the sun and the earth. And we have a brain in our head. And now we know that our body can stay alive without our brain functioning. So there must be a brain within the body as well. And as we see, there are multiple brains. These are all sub-brains. And how they operate is through this constant positioning and repositioning of energy transmutation. And it's either coming or it's going. It's there or it's not there. It's either positive or it's negative. And so this is flipping all the time. And so we see that there's a difference when we look at the physicality of ourselves and say, oh, you know, my body is big, and so I will be building my body, and my brain is so small, you know, I don't have to worry about that. Well, you don't worry about it because you don't have enough skill to worry about it. We have enough skill to worry about our physicality, but that is limiting us to an earthbound field strength. Thank God we have a universal field strength, and we find that our tiny soul is strong enough to feed our massive body. So the energy that the body needs and is capable of delivering is tiny in comparison to the energy that the soul can deliver. And the soul can not only do this within the brain, but by encountering or enlisting the services of the plasma field strength, this now becomes a dynamic plasma reactor. And yes, we can make a difference, and the time has come to make a difference. How is the brain of the man uniquely positioned to be able to take advantage of the star formation that's within the brain, this pituitary pineal gland combination with the soul positioning within the brain, and the structure of the brain itself, the calcium domain of the brain that has the two hemispheres? Well, you see, there is an invisible layer that is only 3 cells thick. This is the Holy Trinity, what we call the supragranular layer. This encapsulates the entire corpus callosum and is unique to man, is what gives us this super capability. And, you know, we are obviously so well endowed. This is why they've named us twice. We are Homo sapiens sapiens. But this capability allows us to delay in consequences. And this is where the abusive man stems from. And this abusive man is carried on into the planet. And the planet is, you know, scratching its proverbial head, wondering, if you're so smart, how come you're so stupid? And that is because we are headstrong. And this is important, to be headstrong. There's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is that the mind is the builder. And so you are what you give your time and attention to. But we have created artificial rules. And one of those rules is that our qualifications. We have degrees. There will be no exam at the end of this class. We do not give degrees from the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. Nothing in the past will qualify you nor disqualify you from the future. Okay? Life is for learning. That's the whole point. Nothing anyone can say or do can affect you unless you allow it. So what we're saying, and have always been saying, is that you have a choice of self-determination. You have a right to look after your own health. That is a universal right. That is a universal right. Use it or lose it. And so we understand that when we define matter, whatever matter it is a manifestation of this energy in motion. And in the old science, it was a small m matter, which meant physicality. In the new science, it's a capital M matter, which is plasmatic. And whether, regardless of whatever kind of matter you're creating, that is a manifestation. And so singularly, we have to bind that energy. And that energy then is creating, co-creating, and procreating. And in all cases, this is manifestation. energy binding is creation. And we have the two types of matter plasma. So we understand we have been preoccupied with physicality because we can touch it and see it. But we now have an introduction to the plasmatic capability. We can't touch it, we cannot see it, but we definitely can sense it. And so now we do understand that science has to recognize love as an energy. And in order to do that, science has to understand that light conveys mass. And so that light has a matter, and that science has to understand that the physical speed of light on this planet is the physical speed of light on this planet. You see, because you have to understand the relationship, and the relationship of energy and motion is the balance between the magnetic and the gravitational fields. That's called the maggrav. And so we have the old science and we have the old spirituality. Both are right. However, they have their own terminology. We need to bring those two together and have a balance there. We understand how manifestation happens. We have ideas, we have cells. So these are matter manifestations. And we see that the light is mass in motion, and it converts into energy. And the soul is representative of this energy. So keywords: balance, additive, manifestation, conversion. Conversion, plasma soul feeding. When the plasma soul is feeding, it feeds our body. So the future classes, we're now, and for the last 3 weeks, we've been discussing in the Knowledge Seekers Workshop, is where this energy is coming from and how it is being transformed into this plasma soul feeding manifestation, which we call our physicality. And so we understand that now we have a new reality. The new reality is a manifestation when two fields come together, they form another. It is the formation of this other field, which is the manifestation, but it is the plasma feeding which leads to the manifestation. And so the rule is the manifestation may be either non-tangible or tangible. Doesn't have to be both. May be non-visible or visible, may be plasmatic or physical. There is a plasmatic reality and there is a physical reality. In all cases with a physical reality, there is a plasmatic reality that supports it, but it doesn't have to have a physical reality to manifest a physical reality. Regardless, whatever reality you have is a form artifact and it represents the manifestation. And so because we can have a plasmatic reality without a physical reality, now we understand that even just our emotion of presence is also a form artifact of energy and motion. And as we advance from here, we find that there are other energies in motion, which are also plasmatic. But we have a situation where we have to understand within our own environment, within our own household, and within our own person, that plasmatic energy is magnetical interaction of energy through attraction and repulsion. And so we need to see these fields. And we create a magnetical field, and in the core, we create a gravitational field. These are all non-visible to us. We have to understand that these fields exist. These fields are in our brain, in our body, in our essence, in our soul, in our interaction, in our business, in everything. And because we create a maggrav condition, then that begins a giving and taking. And then the question is always giving where and taking from where. But to understand this, we have to understand that the magnetical force is actually a combination of the attraction, the repulsion, plus the magnetical. Conversely, the gravitational force is a combination of repulsion, attraction, plus the gravitational. The attraction, repulsion, or repulsion, attraction is a balanced field, which we call a maggrav. So therefore, the maggrav condition is moving with the magnetical force. It has to add to it. The gravitational force likewise has to be added to its maggrav position. Okay, so this is the two-way street, which is inherent, and this has been, the old science has ignored this. This is the grand unification theory. So we have to understand that we cannot let these cups of life go. They are not cups of virus, they are cups of life. There's a reason for them being called the cups of life, because they involve the basics. When we look at zinc and copper inside the one cup, and we add the third component, which is the nano-coated copper coil, we become plasma scientists, and we create a magnetical field and a gravitational field right inside the cup. And what transpires in there is the interaction of these plasma fields, where the higher strength is feeding the lower strength, but it is drawing higher energy. And that higher energy is a GaNs, which we call in the cup one is a zinc and copper GaNs, which forms a CO2 GaNs. Now you have that basis of that, oh, yeah, that's star formation, which is the building block for your amino acid. When you create the amino acid, you also create the water. We all understand that oil and water don't mix, and that's one of the things that makes life possible. In the second cup of life, we just replaced the zinc plate with the copper plate, and we still have the nano-coated copper coil, and the same reaction happens. We have a magnetical field and a gravitational field. We need to keep making these cups. We need to keep doing it. This is an ongoing thing, and it's a part of our life, and it's, for $10 or less, we can make it happen and build the peace dome. Because when you put the two cups together, there was a relationship between the two cups. One is emotional, one is physical, and they inside both are operating the same way. But if we're using it to prevent from the virus or to recover from the virus, we need to keep these batches at least 1 meter apart. But once we have a sufficient supply of GaNs to be able to accomplish that, we can start building where we can eradicate the virus. This is the first thing that we want to do. And we have other issues that we want to do, but we have to understand that energy is being transferred. Energy is being transformed. Energy is being transmuted. And so first of all, energy is being depleted, just like a battery. You deplete the energy from a battery. You don't see that energy moving, but you know when the energy stops moving. In another unique operation, the energy not only is moving, but is being converted. Converted to what? It's being converted to food. Isn't that interesting? And so this is the basis of the cups of man. We have the nourishment for our emotional and physical vitality. And we have that right in our hands. We can create a magnetical field. We can create a gravitational field. And we know that that energy is in motion, because as our cups mature, we can see the hole in the GaNs. As you see in the right-hand side of the picture, something is in there. And although you don't see it, you know it's there, because you have a form artifact of a hole in your GaNs. And so when someone else asks you, well, what is plasma? Tell them it's just a kind of energy state, and it's pretty important. It is going to affect our life. And our life is now, we're trying to figure out everything that we've learned, are we saying that it's backwards or is it upside down? No, we're just having to understand that, we are having a problem going in line with the universal way of pole flipping. We have the dogma of ignorance, which is coming from man's arrogance. The volunteers need to find and accept the new science. Our souls need to be engaged. We have brains. It is really time for us to become wise, because this is what is holding us up. Our point of view has been exclusively earthbound. We are fantasizing about our point of view being spacebound. We are already spacebound. We are spacebound creatures. We are in our body on this planet Earth. And with the coming of the KFTV, we are now able to tell the world the truth. And we find that what is missing in our reality is the ethics, because the plasma science does not work when you don't have the ethics, because the plasma science is peaceful, because the plasma science works in the universe as a benevolent energy. Life is for learning, but life is for living. So life cannot be for murdering and killing. It just doesn't work. And as such, this is our problem. We don't understand how important morality, compassion, and courage is. And courage really is important, because this is the essence of creation. So what are you creating? What we're creating is the universal body enhancement spaceship units, which will give us plasma satisfaction. Plasma satisfaction actually involves the restoration of emotional and physical vitality. What is that? What is that? Do you get that at your local health food store? What that is to understand that the plasma is all things in combination. Things are pushing or pulling. There's a magnetical pushing and pulling. There's a gravitational pushing and pulling. But the balance is a Magrath condition plus a residue. And this is the essence, the soul essence. So now I'll give you something to think about. Just meditate on this. Open and allow the universe to operate. Yield to those energies so that you can receive this. And you set the pattern, you get the energy. So the maximum energy that you will get is from the most ideal pattern. If your schemes are too small, you may not only not get much energy, you may even deplete your own energy. Too many of us are doing that right now. We're just the messengers of peace and friendship. And this is where we are going, because we need to put this plasma science in public domain. This is the goal of the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, not only to sign the World Peace Treaty, sign it with the pen, sign it with our soul, but we need to bring physical and emotional harmony and vitality to this planet. This planet is screaming. And we as knowledge seekers, we know deep in our soul that this is very, very important. And so now we have a forum where we can expose this truth, which is really obvious anyway. It's not like we're doing anything special in that regard. We all know the truth. But the question is, what difference does it make? And if you know this information and then you discover the truth, so what? What we have to figure out is to understand that this dynamic plasma state is within us. It is the universal language within, and it is the same language throughout the whole universe. That's why the plasma science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. Thank you all so much for listening. That's the end of the lesson. Mark, over to you, buddy.
Thank you, Alex. I hope you have a minute to take a sip of water and clear your throat a little. Dan had suggested you might need a sip of water. We were going to interrupt you, but then I said, let's let him go. He'll know when he needs it or not. But in the chart, you had the organs in. I noticed you had a term Leidig, and I had never heard this term before. So I looked it up, and it said Leidig, German anatomist who described in 1850 the interstitial cell in the study of the testes and published important works in the field of histology. Where did you come up with this term, Leidig?
This is part of the teachings of Edgar Casey. He did 5,000 medium seances, and he recounted the history of so many people. And out of all of those 5,000, the most startling discovery was that there was never a conflict. And this is the same thing I wish to point out. In the over 3,000 hours that Mr. Kesh has put together, there has never been a discrepancy, a discontinuity. You understand? A theory is a theory until it's disproven once. You can prove a theory 1,000 times, but disprove it once and it's a failure. Mr. Kesh's theories have never been disproven. Edgar Casey, that's the answer to your question.
Okay. Yes, he definitely went into another dimension to do so many things. I don't know exactly how he did it or why he was doing it, but yet he couldn't do it for himself at the end, apparently. As I don't know much about Mr. Casey, but he was an extraordinary, as we all are, and he was able to tap into some sort of realm there to discover something where he could go and visualize other people's illnesses and actually give them the ability to change. I don't know what he actually, did he ever attribute it to anything? Or I never studied Casey per se much, but I know he
Have
was.
you ever been to a seance?
No.
Well, basically, the one soul steps out and lets another soul comes in and takes over the body. And this is a, shall we say, a temporary visit. And so that soul would have a different knowledge. And the first soul that kind of, it's almost using your body like a motel, you know. I'll be able to, you know, for an hour or two, and then I'll come back, okay? And
Sure, like a medium or something along that line.
That's right. The problem for most of the mediums is because of the science, the way how it you know, listed that as part of the paranormal activity and played it down and couldn't explain it. It became sensational. So the people involved with this became extraordinary. And for many of them, it went to their head and they seemed to be special. But we all have this capability and we all do this every night in our dreams. And as we start to remember our dreams, the thing you find with a lot of the questions about the dreams that Mr. Kesh keeps fielding is that those questions are always personal. And that is one of the things that was annoying with Mr. Casey. 5,000 seances where people would say, well, can you tell me, you know, if my daughter is going to marry a rich man, or is my business going to be successful? You know, like, really, who cares? Why don't you ask, you know, serious questions? And so the only way that you could put all that together, you had to be kind of a Sherlock Holmes and go through all 5,000 seances and try and put things together, and then you find little clues in how to overcome various illnesses, you know. But
so he never
was annoying.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying it was annoying because the interest was always on a selfish basis. You know, I have this, you know, hangnail. Can you tell me how to get rid of it? And this is the self-centered nature, instead of understanding that our environment and our thought process is very much part of the whole thing. And so if someone in our community is sick, our whole community is sick. And this is where the compassion has to come in. And we're not playing that game. That's the sad part about it.
So was that Mr. Casey able to teach this to others, or was it just himself?
Well, while he was in a trance, he didn't have a memory. So the only way he had to have someone take dictation.
Okay, but he never taught it. I was thinking of the Buddha at the same time, where he could dissolve his physicality and move himself, let's say, across a river or across the lake, and then reappear within the blink of an eye. But Mr. Kesh, I thought, said he didn't know how to teach it. He understood it.
No. These are magic tricks, and they're meant to impress. But again, to create an awe, an impression, and entertainment. And the Kesh Foundation is not about entertainment. If you want entertainment, go on the internet or TV. This is about life, understanding about life, and all of us have this capability. There's nothing exclusive about that. So the fact in the past we used to put people like Mr. Casey on a pedestal, and that was kind of like a door or a passageway to some kind of paranormal activity, and it was kind of fun and entertaining. But in actuality, when you would look at him and Jane Roberts and Seth and Raw, all these others, they're all saying the same thing. And that's the thing. When you sit back and you look at what all these mediums are saying, they're all saying the same thing. And so there's a consistency. And then you have other mediums like Blavatsky, who, is abusive. And because of her special talents, she feels omnipotent and arrogant and overlording. And so this is the breakdown. As soon as we get into this arrogant position, we will be recreating the same problems. And so this requires a discipline and a self-determination. And now we understand the statement of, the last man standing. Each and every one of us can make this choice. Most of us didn't know we had a choice. We have a choice, and it's within our hands, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. Bring the plasma into the home and see the beauty as it manifests. Isn't that correct?
I think Mr. Kesh said Jesus understood his teaching fully, and the Buddha understood it partially. Now, Danilo has a question in the chat. I don't know if he'd like to open his microphone, but to you, Alex, do the cells have consciousness and free will? I would say the cells in the body he's referring to, but maybe he wants to clarify it for us. Danilo?
Yeah, you are correct. My question is, if the cells on the body have free will and consciousness. You're right.
Well, of course, the cells have free will, and they've exercised that they become part of your team. And do they have a consciousness? Yes, of course they have, because the perimeter of the cells is made up of phospholipids, and these phospholipids are made up of essential fatty acids, and the gates have to open and close. So there has to be some kind of medium for communication, and this communication isn't electrical. It has to be plasmatic. So none of us are walking around the city with an extension cord attached to us. Okay, so we have to understand this. It should be easy to understand because we're in the age of Wi-Fi. So, you know, we all like our wireless networks. Well, if we like our wireless networks for our computers and stuff, how come we don't respect the wireless network that we have for our body? So yeah, our cells are our cells. And just like we came to this planet because we wanted to, and the planet wanted us, so there was a welcoming here in the first place, and then we grew because we wanted these cells to grow, and our cells manifested because there was a welcoming. So that process repeats itself. So structure within a structure, within a structure, within a structure, creation, co-creation, and procreation. So the answer is yes. Thank you for your question.
I noticed Freed joined us a moment ago, but I don't see him in the list. Freed, if you can hear me, you might be here under another name. Is there a Netherlands Corona team? Elias was looking for the link to that. If you can hear me, maybe you can answer that.